In the vast, cold silence of deep space aboard an aging research vessel drifting just beyond the edge of our solar system, something impossible happened. It began with a signal. Not just any signal. This one was old, ancient. It pulsed with a rhythm no human language could explain. Yet somehow, when it reached the minds of those who heard it, it felt familiar. Like a memory you can't place or a dream you forgot but never stopped feeling. It wasn't a message meant to be heard. It was meant to be remembered. Dr. Elias Rowe, a linguist and xenotech specialist, sat frozen at his console. He wasn't supposed to be on this mission. He'd only joined last minute after another scientist had fallen ill. But as the signal repeated again and again, something in Elias stirred. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a sense of recognition, a feeling that deep down this was meant for him, for us. The crew of the Astris Nova, a modest, civilian-led deep space survey team, had picked up the signal while mapping subspace anomalies near a newly discovered exoplanet. The plan was simple: scan, collect data, and return home. No one expected contact. Certainly not with a civilization that had been watching the stars long before Earth had cooled from its molten youth. At first, the signal seemed like background noise, a cosmic echo bouncing off stellar debris. But when Elias ran it through a harmonic translation matrix, the noise became a pattern. The pattern became symbols. And the symbols became something far more profound. They were genetic markers. Human genetic markers. Hidden inside this message were fragments of our own DNA, not copied, not modified, identical. The crew was stunned. The implications were enormous. This wasn't just contact with an alien race. It was contact with something that knew us, something that had been waiting, something that remembered. Commander Layla Brennan, the mission lead, was the first to ask the question everyone was too afraid to say out loud. How do they have our DNA? Unless we came from them. The possibility was outrageous, yet the data couldn't be denied. And that was when the signal changed. It became directional, guiding them not toward the planet, but beyond it, into the dark, into a region of space, long considered a navigational dead zone, unstable, chaotic, and lethal to most ships. But Elias insisted they follow. And against her better judgment, Layla agreed. As the Astris Nova plunged deeper into the region, systems began to glitch. Lights flickered. Gravity became unreliable. Time itself seemed to ripple. And then, just as suddenly, everything went still. Outside the viewport, the crew saw something that no telescope on Earth had ever captured. A structure, impossibly large, floating in the void, ancient, yet intact. A gateway, perhaps, or a temple. It pulsed with the same rhythm as the signal. The crew suited up and approached. Inside, they found walls inscribed with glyphs that seemed to shimmer when looked at directly. The air, yes, there was breathable air, smelled faintly of rain and soil. And standing at the center, surrounded by soft, glowing light, was a being, unlike anything they had imagined. Its eyes were bright, not just with intelligence, but with something else: recognition. It didn't speak in words. It didn't need to. As it raised one long, elegant arm, 1,000 images flooded the minds of the crew. Images of vast civilizations rising and falling, of planets born and lost to time, of a species that once spread across galaxies, only to disappear. And finally, the image of Earth, a blue sphere cradled in the void. The being communicated a single idea. We are not alone. We never were. They called themselves the Lumari, the first light, the first intelligent life in the universe. They had watched the stars grow, watched life emerge and vanish, and once, long ago, they seeded life across the cosmos. Including, Earth humans were not their creation, they explained, but their descendants, the last children of a lineage scattered by cosmic disaster, wars among the stars, and time itself. We were never meant to be forgotten. We were simply lost. And now, we were found. But not all was peaceful. The Lumari weren't the only ones who remembered. Something else had survived the eons. a force that had once tried to extinguish the Lumari and all life they had touched. The signal that called the Astris Nova was not just a greeting, it was a warning. The old enemy had awakened. As the crew tried to comprehend what this meant, the being placed its hand on Elias's shoulder. His body froze, his eyes glowed faintly, and a cascade of knowledge poured into his mind. He saw it all. The truth of our origins, the wars of the ancients, and the reason humanity had been hidden, protected across light years of space. We were the last hope of a forgotten legacy, the only ones who might stand against what was coming. And then, the lights went dark. A tremor shook the structure. The Lumari looked toward the ceiling, its eyes narrowing. "They've found you," it whispered, voice finally audible, low and melodic. Back on the ship, alarms blared. Something massive was approaching. Something that didn't register on any scans but moved with intent. Shadows began to stretch unnaturally across the bulkheads. And just before the feed cut out, Layla's voice echoed across the comms. "They're not here to talk." And then, silence. What happened next remains classified by Earth Space Command. The official story claims the Astris Nova suffered a systems failure and was lost. But fragments of data, scrambled transmissions, blurry visuals still leak onto hidden networks, whispers of first contact, of forgotten heritage, of beings who look into our eyes and see home. And if you listen closely on a clear night, you might still catch the signal, soft and pulsing in the background of the stars, calling out to us, calling us back to who we were, and warning us of what's coming. The truth isn't out there, it's within us, but time is running out and they're coming. The silence after the last transmission from the Astris Nova stretched on for days. Earth's Deep Space Command refused to comment publicly, but behind closed doors, quiet panic had begun. The data that slipped through, fragments of video, distorted voice logs, telemetry, was enough to alarm even the most skeptical analysts. They showed things that defied known science. Energy signatures not found in any natural phenomena. Gravitational distortions that made planets ripple like waves. And most disturbingly, a single phrase repeated in a voice that was not quite human. "They have returned." No one knew what it meant. Not at first. Back on Earth, Dr. Elias Rowe's name had become a focal point. Before the mission, he had been a quiet figure in the academic world. Passionate, yes, but largely dismissed as an idealist. He often gave talks about ancient signals buried in the cosmic microwave background, about shared genetic codes across species, about a forgotten age of unity in the stars. Most called it speculation. Some called it science fiction. But after the Astris Nova vanished and the leaked transmissions confirmed Elias was at the center of it all, people began to look again, and they started to wonder if he had known something, long before anyone else. Among the people asking questions was Rei Nakamura, an exoarchaeologist who had once worked with Elias during a university collaboration years ago. She remembered the nights they'd stayed up discussing anomalies in the fossil record, strange alignments of ancient ruins with star systems long gone. He used to joke that human history was full of breadcrumbs left by someone who never came back. But now Rei wasn't laughing. She pored over the transmission footage again, focusing on the moment the alien, what Elias had called a Lumari, touched him. The light that spread from the being's hand seemed to trigger something deep in Elias. His posture changed. His eyes flickered with something she couldn't explain. It was like watching someone wake up from a dream they'd been having their entire life. Rei was convinced Elias wasn't just a crew member who got lucky. He was the reason they were found. What no one could explain was why the Lumari waited until now. The answer may have been in the place they found, the structure beyond the dead zone. Experts called it an artifact, though it was far too large and complex to be anything less than a fully functional station, likely abandoned for hundreds of thousands of years. Satellite imagery, captured in the final seconds of the feed, showed markings that mirrored ancient symbols found in places like Göbekli Tepe, the Nazca Lines, and even on certain unexplained carvings in the Mariana Trench. If the Lumari had seeded Earth with life, they hadn't left us completely alone. They had left signs. As more pieces came together, a secret branch of Earth's Interstellar Council authorized a covert mission. Its goal was to trace the original signal to its point of origin. If it was repeating, there had to be more to it. Maybe a pattern, maybe a key. The team assembled was small and deliberately off the books. Rei Nakamura was among them. So was a former intelligence officer named Jalen Ward, whose job was to make sure nothing leaked to the public. The rest of the crew was hand-picked for their ability to keep quiet and stay alive. What they didn't expect was how fast things would escalate. 2 weeks into the mission, while mapping residual energy from the signal, Rei made a discovery that turned everything upside down. The Lumari signal wasn't just repeating, it was adapting, changing. Every few hours, the waveform shifted slightly, almost like it was responding to something, or someone. Even more shocking was when Rei isolated a part of the signal and compared it to human brainwave patterns during deep REM sleep. The results were almost identical. The Lumari weren't just contacting us, they were inside our dreams. That explained the reports from various crew members who had been on the Astris Nova, nightmares of eyes in the dark, voices whispering in forgotten languages, places they'd never seen but somehow remembered. One crew member, in a hidden log before the final blackout, described a memory of standing in a field under 2 suns, speaking to someone tall, glowing, and kind. They said, "I'm not broken," the log ended, "just waiting to be whole again." But not all dreams were peaceful. Some showed vast burning skies and collapsing stars, enormous ships that blotted out entire constellations, creatures of shadow that consumed light, and always at the center of it a void, black and pulsing where the stars went to die. Rei began to suspect the Lumari didn't just seed life, they were at war, and humanity, whether we knew it or not, had been hidden away like a precious secret. A child smuggled from a burning house. The conflict, whatever it was, wasn't over. One night, while monitoring the signal in isolation, Rei fell asleep at her console. She dreamed of a hallway lined with crystal mirrors. Each one showed her a version of herself, older, younger, wounded, triumphant. At the end of the hallway stood Elias, calm, his hand outstretched. He didn't speak, but she felt him say, "It's almost time." When she woke, her computer had recorded a data burst in the exact moment she lost consciousness. It wasn't from the system. It wasn't from the ship. It was from outside. And it wasn't random. It was a map. The coordinates pointed to a sector deep within a system known as Lyra 9, an area long believed uninhabitable due to gravitational instability. But what lay within defied all logic. A cluster of planetoids suspended in perfect stillness as if locked in a stasis field. And orbiting one of them, barely visible, a ship. Not a human ship, not a Lumari vessel, but something else. Dark, angular, pulsing with energy that made the instruments flicker. Jalen didn't want to go. He said it felt wrong, like walking into a place where you were already expected. But Rei knew they had to. If Elias had left them that message, if that map came through her dream, then someone or something was still trying to reach out. The ship moved toward the coordinates, and the deeper they went, the stranger things became. Instruments failed, without warning. Time stretched and contracted in ways they couldn't measure. People forgot basic words mid-sentence, but the worst part was the sound. A low hum that vibrated through their bones, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to them. When they arrived, the alien ship remained still. No lights, no response. Rei and Jalen suited up, tethered together, and approached it in a small shuttle. As they drifted closer, Rei noticed markings along the hull, deep carvings that seemed to shimmer even in shadow. They weren't Lumari. They were human, or at least, they looked that way. She reached out, her gloved fingers brushing one of the symbols. A jolt of heat shot through her arm and into her chest. Her breath caught. Her eyes fluttered, and she saw Earth. But not as it is. As it was. Before the oceans, fully formed. Before the continents split. A small blue flame hung above a quiet sea. And watching from above, cloaked in light, was a figure she couldn't name, but knew in her soul. The Lumari didn't just find us. They had been waiting for. The day we would remember who we were, and Ray, she had just begun to remember. Ray stumbled back as the vision faded, her breathing shallow inside the suit. Her hand trembled where it had touched the alien ship. Jalen caught her just before she drifted off course. He said her eyes had gone white for nearly a minute, and her comm had filled with strange, layered voices, none of them hers. But Ray remembered every second of what she saw. Not just the image of ancient Earth, but something behind it. A presence, hidden and watching. It had no shape, no face, but she felt it press against her thoughts. Curious. Waiting. Not like the Lumari. This was something else. Back on the ship, the crew analyzed the hull of the alien vessel. It was made of a material that absorbed all forms of radiation. No light bounced off it. No signal returned. It was like the ship didn't want to be found. And yet it was here, exactly where the signal led them. Embedded deep within one of the markings, the team discovered a dormant data node. It was old, possibly older than any known technology, but something about it responded to Ray. When she came near, it lit up with a faint glow. The node unlocked itself and played a short transmission, 6 seconds long. It showed Elias again, but not the same Elias. This version was older, worn down, standing on a foreign world with a storm raging behind him. He looked directly into the camera and said, "If you're hearing this, they've breached the veil. Don't trust the silence, it's listening." Then the feed cut off. The crew fell into uneasy silence. It wasn't just the message. It was the fact that this Elias didn't match any current timeline. He looked like he'd lived a decade since the Astris Nova went missing. Time, it seemed, was no longer something they could trust. Somewhere along the way, the line between past, present, and future had started to blur. Ray began to suspect that Elias hadn't just been contacted by the Lumari, he had been changed by them, or maybe taken, or maybe he had stepped into something far older than the Lumari themselves. Jalen, ever the skeptic, pushed back. He started digging into older mission logs, searching for any mention of other contact events that might have been hidden from the public. What he found was chilling. Decades ago, before the existence of the Lumari was even theorized, multiple deep space probes had gone dark in the same region. The official reports claimed system malfunctions, but buried in the raw data were strange patterns, similar to the Lumari signal but twisted, corrupted, like something had tried to imitate it. Those signals weren't from the Lumari. They were from the old enemy. Ray and Jalen took this to Commander Soren, who led the shadow unit behind the mission. But Soren already knew. He had known from the start. The mission wasn't just to follow the signal. It was to confirm if the enemy had returned. Earth's leaders had feared it for years, ever since old relics were recovered from Mars and Europa, showing civilizations wiped out by a force that left no survivors. The Lumari had gone silent after that time, vanishing from the stars. And now, centuries later, humanity was finally reaching far enough into the dark to attract attention again. But the Lumari hadn't called out only to warn. They were looking for something. Someone. More and more, Ray wondered if that someone was Elias, or what Elias had become. Back on Earth, strange things had started happening too. People were having shared dreams, visions of burning skies and massive towers of light. Entire towns in remote parts of the world began reporting sudden blackouts followed by mass sightings of glowing figures who said nothing, only watched. Some people claimed to have missing time, hours or even days lost, with no memory of what happened. Governments denied everything, but underground networks old conspiracy circles once laughed at were now being taken seriously. They spoke of the Starborn, a term that began appearing on encrypted forums. According to these theories, a small number of humans carried dormant traits, genetic markers passed down from the Lumari themselves. These people, the theory said, could hear the signal more clearly, could connect, could lead. Ray didn't want to believe it, but the pieces fit too well. Elias had shown signs from the start. She had seen glimpses in herself. And worse, so had others. One of the engineers, Malik, confessed to Ray that he'd started seeing things outside the ship. Glowing, shapes moving just at the edge of perception. He thought he was losing his mind until he showed her a drawing he made during a blackout. It was the same symbol Ray had seen on the alien ship, the one that lit up when she touched it. But then Malik vanished. No signs of a struggle, no alarms triggered. Just gone. His quarters were untouched. His last log entry simply said, "There. Inside the quiet. I hear them when I'm not listening." Panic started to spread through the crew. Commander Soren locked down the ship, ordered comms to be restricted, and ordered an emergency return vector. But Ray refused to leave. She was too close to understanding what was happening. The Lumari had opened a door, but they hadn't told the whole truth. If the old enemy was truly back, why now? Why had they waited? And why was humanity suddenly so important? The more Ray explored the alien vessel, the more she sensed that it wasn't built for war. It was built for containment. Inside its deepest chamber, she found a sealed pod. Not broken, not damaged, just locked. And on its surface, a human handprint. Her hand fit, the pod hissed. And then, everything changed. The ship's systems went wild. Lights surged, gravity flickered. A wave of pressure rolled out across the hull. Ray felt something push against her mind, something old and powerful and deeply familiar. She stumbled back, and in that instant, saw another vision. The stars above Earth dimming, a massive shadow passing between the worlds. The voice of Elias, distant now, almost lost in static. "They're not what you think. Neither are we." And then silence. Outside, something stirred in the dark. A shape, too large to measure. A hum rising in the background. The veil had been breached, and they were no longer alone. Ray couldn't hear anything. For a moment, the silence was so thick it felt like a pressure in her chest. Every sound inside the ship had stopped. The hum of the engines, the soft mechanical whir of the air filtration. Even her own heartbeat felt distant. She stood alone in the chamber, facing the pod that was now pulsing with a low blue light. The handprint still glowed under her palm, but whatever she'd just awakened wasn't finished yet. Outside the chamber, alarms flickered to life. The emergency lights on the ship turned red. Something was moving out there. Commander Soren's voice came through the comms, tight with urgency. He ordered everyone back to the bridge. Ray didn't move. She was frozen by what she had just seen. Those stars fading, that enormous shadow stretching across the system, blotting out the light. It hadn't been a vision. It was a memory. Not hers. But something passed into her mind, left like a trace, a warning. Jalen burst into the chamber a moment later. His face was pale and his suit was scratched. "They're coming," he said. "Whatever you woke up, it's calling something." The ship started to shake. Not from weapons or a mechanical failure, but from outside. The gravity around them was shifting, bending like fabric under strain. Ray and Jalen raced through the corridors, back toward the bridge, while Soren and the crew attempted to bring the vessel under control. The lights dimmed again. Systems flickered. The alien ship outside remained still, almost as if it were watching, waiting for what came next. In the observation deck, the crew stared in disbelief. Through the glass, a crack in space had formed, not like a wormhole, not like anything the science team could identify. It wasn't a rip. It was more like space was being pulled apart, something pushing in from the other side. Then the sensors picked up readings, dozens of signatures. Not ships, but life forms. Massive, cold, moving in perfect coordination as if guided by a single will. They weren't Lumari, and they weren't human. The crew called them echoes, because their shapes flickered like afterimages, always slightly behind the present moment. They didn't seem bound by time or motion. They moved like thoughts, slipping through matter and reappearing wherever they wanted. The ship's defense systems didn't even recognize them as threats, but everyone on board knew something ancient had just stepped into their reality. Soren issued the evacuation protocol, but there was nowhere to go. The enemy was already here. Ray stood still in the center of the bridge, feeling a pulse in the base of her skull. It was rhythmic, like a countdown. Her thoughts weren't entirely her own anymore. She kept hearing the voice of Elias, not just words, but emotions, fragments of who he used to be. He had become something else now. Not fully human, not fully Lumari, something between. And whatever he had turned into, he was trying to reach her. Suddenly, the main display lit up, not with a warning, but with an image. Elias's face again, older than before, his eyes no longer human. He spoke calmly but urgently. "You're the key. They left it in your blood. The old ones aren't here to fight. They're here to reclaim. We were their first children. Long before Earth was born, we were scattered, hidden in flesh and time. But they've found us now, and they're waking up." The feed cut again. The bridge fell into chaos. Crew members demanded answers, some shouting that they needed to fire on the echoes, others saying they should try to communicate. Jalen turned to Ray, his voice shaking. "What did he mean, in your blood? What did they put in you?" Ray didn't know. But a memory surfaced. Her grandfather's strange stories about dreams of stars that didn't belong to the sky. A medical test when she was young that had been pulled by government officials and never explained. All her life, something had been watching. The Lumari hadn't picked her by accident. As the echoes moved closer, Ray felt them again. Not as enemies, but as something else. Something older than fear. They were not here to destroy. They were here to reclaim what was lost, and she was part of that. The alien ship outside responded to the presence of the echoes by unfolding. Its walls shifted like living metal, revealing a massive chamber buried beneath its surface. Inside it was a throne, not symbolic, but functional. Made from something organic, humming with stored memory. It was not for a ruler. It was for a conductor, a pilot. The moment Ray saw it, she knew it was meant for her. The conflict now wasn't about survival. It was about choice. If she sat in that seat, she wouldn't just see what Elias saw. She would become part of it, part of the ancient. Code passed down through generations, buried in humanity's DNA like a forgotten promise. She could become the bridge, the link, the one who speaks for the lost children of the stars. But what would that mean for the rest of humanity? Would Earth still recognize her? Soren threatened to destroy the alien ship to stop what was happening. He didn't believe Ray could control it. He believed she had already been compromised and that the signals, the visions, the pod, were all part of a larger trap. But Jalen stood in front of her. "If this is a trap," he said, "then it's the most carefully built one in history. But I've seen enough to believe you, Ray. And I think this was always coming." The echoes stopped just outside the vessel's perimeter. They hovered, silent, waiting. They weren't attacking. They weren't speaking. They were holding position, like soldiers awaiting command, or children waiting for their mother. Every heartbeat felt like thunder. Ray stepped forward. She looked out at the stars, now scattered with shapes that bent space like water. The universe wasn't empty. It never had been. It had just been waiting for its children to come home, and now, everything was about to change. Ray stood at the threshold of the ancient vessel's heart, the pulsing hum of the throne matching the rhythm of her breath. Behind her, the ship's crew watched in stunned silence. The echoes still hovered outside, unmoving, not attacking, just waiting. The air felt charged with something deeper than electricity. It was history pressing down on everyone, the kind of weight that came only at the end of long-forgotten stories. Her steps toward the throne felt slow, heavy with everything they meant. With each one, memories not her own flickered in her mind. Worlds, rising and falling, stars being born, and voices calling through time. She didn't know if they were from Elias, the Lumari, or something older still, but they were there and they were real. When she placed her hands on the armrests, the ship responded instantly. The walls lit up, the entire vessel coming alive. in waves of glowing energy. Ray didn't feel overwhelmed, she felt understood. The ship wasn't just a machine, it was a memory bank, a transmitter, a witness. And now she was its voice. A soft wave of energy radiated out from the vessel, not as an attack, but as a signal. The echoes responded, their forms straightening, the flickering around their edges calming. One by one, they projected beams of light toward the ship. Not weapons, but a connection. Data. Images. Emotions. Ray understood them without words. The old species, as humanity had called them in their records, had never vanished. They had stepped back when they realized their reach had grown too vast, too fast. The Lumari were not their creators. They were their watchers, caretakers of something even more ancient. Humanity had been part of that lineage, not genetically engineered, not abducted or altered, but gently guided, planted like a seed among the stars. The chaos in the universe, the wars, the collapses of civilizations, the lost colonies, had never been part of the plan. Somewhere along the line, the balance had been disturbed. Elias had been the first to hear the call clearly, to respond without fear. That's why they showed him the truth, why they let him live among them. He had chosen not to return because he'd been helping them prepare for this moment. Ray turned back to the crew, her voice calm, but filled with something new. They don't want war. They want us to remember who we are, where we came from. Soren lowered his weapon slowly, the tension in his shoulders melting into something like grief. Then why all of this? The fear, the silence, the darkness. Because we forgot them, Ray answered. And they were afraid we might try to destroy what we didn't understand, like we always have. Jalen stepped forward, his eyes locked on Ray. So what happens now? Outside the ship, the stars shifted. The echoes turned as one, slowly drifting away from the vessel, their mission complete. But they left behind something else. Coordinates, etched in light across the starscape. A path. Not a demand, not an invasion, an invitation. Humanity would have to choose. Back on Earth, things began to change. The shared dreams ended, replaced by a quiet sense of understanding in those who had experienced them. Government silence turned into hesitant communication. The transmissions from the echoes, now decrypted with Ray's help, revealed messages of peace, history, and warnings about repeating the same mistakes that had ended the civilizations before them. Ray returned home, but not as the same person. She wasn't different physically, but something inside her had awakened. She wasn't meant to rule or lead. Her role was simpler. She was a bridge, someone who could speak both the language of humanity and the whispers of the stars. Elias never returned in body, but Ray found his final message hidden deep in the vessel's core. It wasn't a warning this time, it was hope. We are not alone. We were never abandoned. We just weren't ready. But if you're hearing this, maybe now we are. The ship that had brought Ray into the stars was placed in orbit, turned into a station where science, diplomacy, and exploration could begin. People from every nation came to see it. It became a symbol not of alien life but of ancient family, of what it meant to grow beyond fear. Jalen stayed by Ray's side, helping her guide the quiet conversations between Earth's leaders and the voices beyond the veil. He often joked that they were just the universe's version of long-lost relatives finally calling after centuries of silence. But they both knew the truth went much deeper. The Lumari returned, no longer as mysterious watchers but as ambassadors. They confirmed everything: the genetic memory, the scattering of human seeds across the galaxy, the long silence they had kept for humanity's protection. Now that silence had ended, and with it, a new chapter began. Ray often visited the ancient vessel in orbit. Sometimes she sat in the throne again, not to command but to listen. Through it she could hear the stars hum, could feel the gentle pulse of other worlds still waiting to wake up. She knew Earth was only one of many. More lost children were out there. The story of humanity wasn't one of isolation. It had always been one of return. The questions that once haunted the species. Are we alone? Who are we? Why are we here? Had found their answers not in conquest but in connection, and as the first new ships launched from Earth, not for war but for welcome, Ray looked up into the sky and smiled. The universe had called, and finally, humanity had answered.